Can you believe it is the 10th anniversary of Hamilton the Musical this year? This week, I am so lucky to have historian, YouTuber, and fellow podcaster Jenn Benny on to discuss her favorite historical places to visit based on the musical. Welcome to Pop Culture Passport, your ultimate guide to quirky and cool destinations across the US. I'm your host, Beth Scalacci, aka the Roman Yeti, here to help you dive into the world of theme parks, uncover film and TV locations, and explore quirky museums, roadside attractions, and legendary venues that capture the heart and soul of this unique country. So grab your pop culture passport and let's discover destinations that resonate with your interest, not just with what's trending on social media. Are you ready? Let's roam! Welcome back. Hamilton was a cultural phenomenon. The show officially premiered on Broadway at the Richard Rodgers Theater on August 6, 2015, but its journey started long before that. Lin-Manuel Miranda first performed what would become the opening song at the White House in 2009, originally calling it the Hamilton Mixtape. Over the next several years, he developed the show at the Public Theater, where it had its off-Broadway debut in early 2015. The response was overwhelming, and Hamilton quickly transferred to Broadway later that year. Since then, Hamilton has won 11 Tony Awards, the Pulitzer Prize for Drama, and a Grammy for Best Musical Theater Album. But beyond the awards, Hamilton reshaped how we tell history on stage, bringing in hip-hop, diverse casting, and a modern lens to the America's founding fathers. Now, a decade later, it remains one of the most influential musicals in Broadway history. Joining me today is Jenn Benny, who is a former naval aviator. She's turned historian and is a loyal Penn Stater. She's earned her master's in American history and a graduate certificate in museum studies from the University of Memphis. Along with Scott, she is the host of the Talk with History podcast, which gives them a chance to go deeper into the details of their Walk with History YouTube videos. And it gives you a behind-the-scene look at history-inspired adventures. You ready to walk and talk with history with Jenn? Let's go. As I said in my intro, I am so excited to welcome Jenn Benny from Talk with History and also Walk with History, which I'm going to have her explain both of those. But Jenn, thanks so much for joining me to sort of celebrate this 10th anniversary of Hamilton.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I think it's so great to be able to have this discussion and talk about this phenomenon, this historical phenomenon that really is coming up on its anniversary here. But no, I really appreciate you having me on your podcast.
Thanks. Like when you're a historian,
Mhm.
and so when you first heard Hamilton's, probably was it the cast recording? Like, how did you first introduce it and get introduced to it?
So I had heard about the show. And like you said, I was already in graduate school for my master's degree of history when I heard about the show. And I have a very good friend who lives in Philadelphia. And we went to our undergrad together at Penn State. And she was dating this guy. And she was like, "What should I get him for Christmas?" And I'm like, "You should get Hamilton tickets. Like, mezzanine seats aren't that bad." This is when the seats were crazy. I mean, they're not cheap now, but they were crazy expensive then, right? Original cast. And I said, "Mezzanine seats aren't that bad. You can buy them for a couple $100." And she said to me, "I'm not a mezzanine girl. Like, I want to get a t-shirt that says that for her," because I was like, "What?" And so she calls me back and she goes, "I bought 6th row tickets." I'm like, I don't even want to know. I don't even want to know how much those cost. But then I laughed and I said, "Now all I got to do is break you two up." And it's just, I was just joking about it. Right. Well, a month later, she calls me crying. "We broke
Oh
up.
no.
Will you go to Hamilton with me?" And I didn't even ask my husband. We lived in Memphis at the time. I bought a plane ticket for New York and I said, "Yep, I will be there." And it was so funny because my professors, had to miss class and I said, "I'm missing class to go see Hamilton." And my professors were like, "Go, let us know what it's like." So I saw it sixth row, right? Original cast, like it was amazing. It was my first time I ever did stage door.
Mm-hmm.
So I waited for them to come out and they were so great and they signed the programs. And this is like 2 in the morning, but it was really fantastic. Now, before I had seen it, I had listened to the music and I had read the book. So, the original book for Hamilton
Mm-hmm.
was, written by a historian. Well, it's actually written by a journalist. Getting problems with that when journalists are writing histories, but and then there's a really great companion book. And I know people aren't seeing this, but it's called Hamilton, the Revolution. And this book goes line by line of the musical with the actual history pulled from the historic book that Miranda used to write the lines. And then
Okay.
he also tells you where he fudged a little bit, and so but that's a great book. If you want to start with where should I go, what are they talking about? Those are the two great books to start with. But there's also I bought this other book called Where Was the Room Where It Happened?
Okay.
And this is a great tour guide book for like New York City about the locations. But that's kind of how I first heard about Hamilton, first saw it. I've seen it 3 times since then, but uh and just really fell in love with the little historical tidbits in there. If you're a historian, he did hold true to some things. And then he takes license in other areas
Mm-hmm.
that aren't true. But if you're a historian, you would know that too. So I always tell people it's for entertainment. It's one of my favorite kind of histories. It makes you want to know more, right? It makes you go, is that true? Is that true? Did that really happen like that? Right? One of my favorite lines is that immigrants, we get the job done. Well, it's Hamilton and Lafayette who say this, right? And I stress to people, neither of them are really immigrants,
Right.
right? Lafayette never immigrates to America, even though he gets American citizenship. He stays French. And he's buried in Paris, and I've been to his grave, so we can talk more about that. And then Hamilton, you can go to his birthplace in Nevis, which was a British colony
Okay.
in the Caribbean. And he eventually goes to St. Croix, which is a Dutch colony. And he
Mm-hmm.
comes from the Dutch colony to the American colonies. So he could kind of say maybe that he's leaving, but he was born in a British colony, going to a British colony. So he's
True.
not an immigrant. And unless everybody's an immigrant, right? George Washington, because they're all born in the British colonies
Right.
that are America. So they're playing with words here and but it's causing an effect and it's causing you to think and it's causing you to question, which is, I think, the most important thing you learn as a historian is the critical thinking aspect of it.
Right.
So Hamilton's great for that.
And it's so interesting because I came to Hamilton from a totally different point of view of I had heard about it and I listened to the music and I was a 1990s hip hop fan.
Mhm.
So I'm hearing Hercules Mulligan sound like Busta Rhymes and I'm
Mhm.
hearing Alexander Hamilton and Eliza sounding like Ashanti and Ja Rule. Like, so I was taken in by the music immediately and then became interested in the history. Um, and I am a mezzanine girl. I've seen it twice in the mezzanine. At the I think second row from the top at the Richard Rogers, right after the OBC had left. So but yeah, so it's so I think that's so cool that you can have this one thing that people come to from different angles and just get absorbed by it. Like it's really interesting how that how that all works. But yeah, I came from it from a musical theater music point of view and yeah, we that was on repeat in our house for a long time.
No, I loved how he did that. I loved how he took famous hip hop songs and used the beat and made it rhyme with historical
hmm
aspects from the book. Um, yeah, like the 10 dual commandments and stuff. Like those are almost word for word from hip hop songs. So like I really do I love that he did that too. It was great.
Yeah. You mentioned the a book about New York places and stuff. So if you are up in Broadway and you're taking in the show, like which places do you recommend visiting, or are there any that you sort of stand above the others? And now, in true road trip fashion, we're making a quick pit stop. But instead of snacks, I've got something a little different for you. Spring is almost here, which means it's the perfect time to start planning our next adventures. To make it even more fun, I created a free bingo card filled with unique experiences, like visiting a roadside attraction, exploring a quirky museum, or my personal favorite, buying road trip snacks like a kid left unattended in the store. And here's the best part. Each episode of this podcast can help you with ideas to fill in a square. Ready to start checking off those boxes? Download your free bingo card at theroamingyeti.com and get inspired for your next trip.
Yeah, so I would definitely recommend if you're there and you're like, I'm seeing Hamilton, what can I see that they're singing about? You definitely want to go to Fraunces Tavern. And Fraunces Tavern is downtown in the financial district. But this is where George Washington does his farewell dinner with all of his officers from the Revolutionary War. So Hamilton is there with him. And if you go there and it's they have the fare, the food like a tavern. So you can order like tavern-esque food. And then the second story has all like the artifacts from the tavern and the time. And you can see George Washington's bill from that last dinner. And it's insane. It's like 200 bottles of wine. It's like, it's insane. And it's only like 40 men. So you sit there and you go, what? But I think if you just survived the Revolutionary War and you made your own country, I get it.
Yeah,
Give me a bottle of
that's
wine.
right.
And so you can eat there. So I recommend if you're going to make like an event of this, go eat there. And you're right across the street from Trinity Church.
hmm
And so you've got to go see where Hamilton is buried and Eliza is buried and Angelica is buried. They're buried there. And Philip is actually Hamilton's son who dies in the duel. There's going to be spoilers in this. So if you haven't seen
If you
it,
don't know it yet, we're sorry.
yes. If you don't know your history, he's also buried there, unmarked, but he's
Okay.
there as well. So if you want to go there and pay your respects to some of the people that are being, these songs are about and their lives, I definitely recommend those two places. Like if you only had an evening, if you only had a day, because they're so important and because they're actually in the musical, I would go to those two places and see the musical. If you have more time, there's other places to go, but those are the two I recommend if you only have a short period of time. And I've been to both. I don't have videos for both, but I have been to both. And they also are right by the 9/11 World Trade Center Museum, which is a fantastic museum. So Trinity Church was like almost in the rubble when the towers fell, but it survived and everything survived there. So it's another place people usually want to visit when they go to New York. So if you're going there, maybe you're not going to the musical, just know that those two locations are right beside it. So
Yeah.
it might be something you want to see.
And if I remember, because we ate at the tavern, it was good food too. Like,
Mhm.
so if nothing else, a stop for a bite to eat. And also at Trinity Church is Hercules Mulligan's grave
Yes.
is too.
Hmm.
Um, but I know that was one, isn't that was a storyline that's sort of not what was done in the show is not accurate history. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
So Hercules Mulligan is not quite, they, again, there's certain stories that are not as drawn out and explained as well. They are still characters and they are still known, but they're not as depicted. I think, like for instance, like Hercules Mulligan and I think Lawrence, when we do Yorktown, Lawrence is with Hamilton at Yorktown. He's
Mm-hmm.
not in South Carolina defending slavery. Like he eventually will get there, but during Yorktown, he's with Hamilton, and they are part of the team that works out the surrender.
Mm-hmm.
So, and even Miranda says, like, I had to kind of stretch this because I want people to know that Lawrence is doing this, and I want people to know that Mulligan's doing this. But there's too much of their story to tell. There's too much to kind of put in. So I kind of just fit it in, even though it's not as accurate. And if you want to know more about them, you can research it.
Right.
Right. I mean, even like, to be honest with you, even the Angelica Hamilton romance is, as historians, we don't believe they had a romance.
Okay.
Right. As historians, we believe they cared for each other. And at the time, when you married your sister, you in law, you really became like this close knit family, and you wrote very, I wouldn't say passionate, but loving letters to each other.
Oh, okay.
Even in their letters, we do see like this, but it's more like a kinship brother sister love. It's not romantic love. And so we as historians don't believe there was ever a romance between the two, but that's something that was made into the musical, right? Because it's
Yeah.
it's more interesting.
Yeah.
And but again, research, you know, dive into the information, look it up. There are some things in there that aren't, if you're getting all your history from Hamilton, just know it's not going to be 100% accurate.
You're you're not gonna do well on that test in high school, guys. You
Yes. Yes.
make sure you're getting something from a historian, not from a writer of musicals.
Yes. I mean, and that's why I even say like be careful, because this book that Miranda uses is written by a journalist, and you do get journalists who write histories. That does happen, but what they adhere to and their rules are different.
Oh,
And
okay.
with journalism, you can write hearsay, you can write third person accounts, you can kind of and call them an accuracy of what was happening, right? Historians can't do that. Everything has to be a primary source.
Okay.
Everything has to be who was there. Was this written right away? Was this a eyewitness? Unless if it's written about, it becomes a secondary source,
Okay.
right? And it becomes somebody's interpretation of it. And so historians have to really point that out, and where journalists can have more leeway in that regard.
That's something I didn't even think about. So that is interesting that it even would be a different point of view for him than as historians what you guys would do.
Mhm.
Um, it's always fascinating. Um, so I know between well, let's quick talk about, you have a podcast and you
Mhm.
have a YouTube channel. Can you break those down a little bit, just to sort of tell us what each one of those is?
Sure. So, walk with history takes you to the location to walk with the history, right? My whole premise in that is to stand in the steps of the giants of history, right? And so there are some moments in Hamilton where you're like, I want to be there, right? Where are those moments? Where I always like, where are those sparks? Where are those sparks? Like, I want to stand where he's talking about. I want to be where he's singing about. I want to know what that felt like. I want to know what that looked like. And there's some places you can go to actually like stand in those locations. And then Talk with History is the podcast that coincides with it.
Hmm.
So if you're driving to Yorktown, if you're driving to Colonial Williamsburg, and you're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to see. Where am I? I want to see what Hamilton saw. I want to be where Hamilton said, take the bullets out your guns, take the bullets out your guns. Like, we move undercover, we move as one. Where was that? I tell you in the podcast. Okay, you're driving to Yorktown. You want to see the readout where Hamilton's taking it. You can stand right on his footsteps. There's a plaque there. This is where you drive. This is where you park. This is where you walk. And it's very easy to see. So I help you with that to make it easier for you. And that way you can kind of do it in the car. as you're going there, which I also appreciated because I would go places and be like, where should I eat?
Hmm.
How much is the ticket to get in? If I go to the museum at Yorktown, what's worth seeing in there as opposed to getting out into the battlefield? Like, do I want to pay for the ticket to see what should I see in there? Is there anything worth seeing in there? So I tell you what artifacts they have if you want to see them. And then where should I really get out to? For me, Yorktown, and we'll go more into this. I loved to stand where George Washington's tent was.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Okay.
Like this is where he made his decisions. This is where like Hamilton's his aide de camp. So he's right beside him in his own tent. Lafayette has his tent a little further down, but you can stand where that tent was. And the original tent is in the Yorktown Museum. So
Oh, okay.
they make a plastic uh, encasement that you can walk under the tent.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
still protected. The artifact's still protected. So you can walk under the tent and then you can go to the actual location where that was. And so for me, as much as it was fun to be where Hamilton was, and I show you exactly where he was, and I show you what a readout is and how they took these two readouts and it really turned the tides there in that moment. It was so neat to be where Washington was,
Hmm.
where he was calling the shots. So and those places are there waiting for you, right? And this is
Right.
what you do pop culture travel. Like these places that are sung about in these songs are there waiting for you to stand there.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about Yorktown because I know
Hmm.
that's a really important it's a great song, great moment of the show. Um I always think that's going to be it blows my mind because I watched it again today just to like refresh myself. And it always blows my mind that doesn't end with intermission. Like, that it goes a little more. I was always like, I feel like that is the perfect ending of Act One song. But I am not going to question the great Lin-Manuel Miranda. Um, but yeah, so like Yorktown is such a powerful song, and for you to be able to stand in those places, that history took place. Like, is that one of your favorite places that you have visited?
I got to sit right on the edge of the readout where Hamilton will make his charge at night, right as the sun set.
Oh.
No one was there, just me. And I'm just sitting there. I was actually holding this book, the original book that was used to write Hamilton. And I was sitting there holding it and looking out. And I just thought to myself, this is why I do this, right? To be in these moments. No one I lived so close to Yorktown for 3 years. I was
Mm.
about 30 minutes away. And every time I would drive back from Colonial Williamsburg, you pass Yorktown because that's where Hamilton and Washington and Rochambeau, like that's kind of where they all met up before they hit Yorktown. And so I love spending a lot of time at Colonial Williamsburg too. Lafayette was there with them. And so it's on the way
Hmm.
geographically. And sometimes I could just be like, I'm just going to pull off and see the readouts. The readouts are very easy. The two readouts that were taken 9 and 10 that were taken by Lafayette took one and Hamilton took the other. Uh, they're right beside the museum. You could pull off on the road and you can walk right over to them. They're not even 10 yards from where you can park. So I could stop there anytime. And the battlefield is open from dusk till dawn.
Mm.
So any day I'm driving by, I'm like, I'm gonna go. And so to be sitting there at sunset was just so beautiful. No one was there. Um, those are the reasons why I do that. And Yorktown is, if you ever been to like a Gettysburg
Hmm.
or a Shiloh, it's a drivable battlefield.
Okay.
And they give you a chart, which is very easy. The red is where the British were, and the yellow are where the colonials are. And so you can follow, it starts with the red and where their line was Cornwallis and where he was more in the town of Yorktown. And there's cute little bed and breakfasts there. And there's a statue there you can go see of George Washington and Hamilton and Rochambeau, and you can take your pictures with the statue. That's where the British, they were all encased in the city.
Okay.
And then in the outskirts, you can drive and you can go to where Rochambeau's camp was and Lafayette and George Washington. And you can see the parapet where they wave the handkerchief of defeat. You can, and then where they surrender and they march out single file, and that's all sung about in the song. So you can go to all those
Right.
locations with your driving chart, which you definitely want to drive it. You don't want to, it's too big to walk. You could
Mm-hmm.
bike it, but it would take all day. But it's one of those things, if you're going to stay overnight and then bike it, you could do that for sure. But it's definitely like a drivable thing. And what most people do in the area is called the historic triangle.
Okay.
So the historic triangle is Colonial Williamsburg, Yorktown, and Jamestown.
Right.
They make up this triangle. So when most people go to visit, they spend one day in each location. And it just lets you know how much American history happens in such a close geographic proximity in Virginia. And this is why Virginia is Old Dominion. Things kind of start here. Jamestown, our first colony that is sustainable colony, not the original colony that's like the lost colony, but it's the first colony that sustainable people stayed and didn't go.
Gotcha.
Um, and then Yorktown and Colonial Williamsburg, which are both tied to the battle and the Revolutionary War. And if you want to go to Colonial Williamsburg, it's not in Hamilton, but it's definitely part of the
Mm-hmm.
story. You can interact with Lafayette. You can talk to George Washington. You can ask them questions about the battle. They're well versed in all the history. So if you had questions about things, you can ask them personally, which I always think of it as like a historian's Disneyland,
Right.
right? So it's
Exactly.
so fantastic. Um, but no, I would definitely, if you're going to go, be a part of that song, the bullets out your guns. Like I do the lines. If you watch my video, I do the lines as I'm walking up there. I take you to where the surrender took place. I take you to where the parapet where they wave the surrender flag. I take you to where the surrender official surrender happens. They march out of Yorktown. Like I do the lines so you can kind of
Mm-hmm.
see where this is all happening in this one location. So that's kind of walk with history takes you there, and then talk with history will explain as you're driving how to find it and where to
Yeah,
go.
exactly. And it's both great. So it's definitely that perfect 1-2 punch, actually.
Mm, yes.
Um, in addition to your, like, what are those other places that just have been very powerful, or some of your favorites to, sort of stand in those footprints of Hamilton?
Well, I will say the one place that I went to that's in the song, but not really. You have to kind of know the history, and this is what made Chris Jackson, the original George Washington, reach out to me, and I interviewed him for my 100th podcast. So if you're interested, we talk about him playing George Washington.
Yes,
But
and it's
I
a
went.
great episode.
Oh,
I
thank
will I will make sure I'm gonna put that in the show notes link.
I just happened, I have a friend who lives in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, my best friend actually, and her daughter was having her baby shower. So I drove out there. And as I'm driving home, I drive by Fort Necessity. And I'm like, oh, should I stop? Should I not stop? Like I'm in my workout stuff and I'm like, I'm gonna stop. And so, and it's a national park, so it's free for me. I'm a veteran, I'm a
Hmm.
disabled vet, so I can go to any national park for free. So I walk into Fort Necessity. Now, this fort is built by George Washington uh, in the French and Indian War.
Oh,
So,
okay.
100 Years' War. George Washington is a new officer. He's a British officer. He gets in over his head. So, he's in charge of a group of British soldiers, and he coincides with a American Indian tribe to help them kind of scout out the land. And this is close to Pittsburgh. And if you know anything about Pittsburgh during the French and Indian War, Pittsburgh was a French fort. Fort Duquesne was there.
Okay.
And the French had kind of really taken that area. And unbeknownst to Washington, the chief of the tribe that's helping him scout the land, his brother was killed by a French officer.
Mm.
So when they come upon a group of French men kind of camped out, the chief just massacres them. He and his people, and George can't stop it. He's just like,
Right.
like, and new. He's a new officer. He doesn't know what to do. Like these people just kind of did this, and
Mm.
unbeknownst to him, they kill the leader of the French fort, Duquesne's. They kill his brother,
Oh, jeez.
and one of them gets away, and he knows he's going to make it back to that fort and tell them. So George is like, if you think about it, he let this incident happen that really is going to cause worldwide problems, right? The
Hmm.
British have attacked the French during this unprovoked. It wasn't a battle. It was just like they massacred these French men. And so George travels about 10 miles away and builds a fort called Fort Necessity because he knows that once that Frenchman gets to Fort Duquesne, they're going to come for them. And there's no way they're going to be able to defend themselves on the run. So he builds a fort of just a bunch of like tree trunks in a
Oh, okay.
circle, digs a little ditch, and waits. And it doesn't take long, like 4 days. And this battle actually happens on July 4th, which is so interesting, like 1774.
Wow, that's surreal.
It's surreal. And I mean, actually, I think earlier than that. I should look up like the exact date for necessity. But in this battle, there's a huge rainfall, and so the British, I mean, they're the British trying to defend themselves, can't really defend themselves. The French can't really kill everybody, but they kill half of his men. And then they surrender. George Washington surrenders, and then he's has to sign this declaration of surrender, which he says that he assassinated the brother because he doesn't understand French.
Oh, jeez.
So he signs this. So there's so many things that he does in this moment that are so wrong. He could have lost his command. He should have lost his command. He should have been reprimanded. He probably should have been killed. He leaves his officers behind as part of the surrender, right? And then he go matches back to Virginia, and they kind of treat him as a hero because he survives it, when
Hmm.
really he lost big time,
Yeah.
but he learned a lot. And so that's what he's saying, and history has his eyes on you. I
Okay.
am younger than you are now. When I was given my first command, I walked my men straight into a massacre. I witnessed their deaths firsthand. He's talking about Fort
That.
Necessity. He's
Wow.
talking about that whole incident where he let something happen he couldn't control. He had to pay for it. He lost his men. He signed a surrender that made him look like he had purposely planned this. It made the British look so bad in this French and Indian War. Um, and he's trying to tell Hamilton what he's learned from that experience and how
Mm.
he's lucky to have learned it.
Yeah.
And I went there. I told that story. I did the lines. I'm trying to reinforce like how young George Washington is, how much he's learning in this moment, how much this will always stay with him for the rest of his military career, and what he's trying to impart to Hamilton with these lines. Even though you never hear Fort Necessity in the musical or anything like that.
Right.
And so when I made this video, it was just real quick. It was like a minute long on Instagram. Chris Jackson reached out to me, and Chris Jackson said, I love that video. Thank you for doing that. I never had a chance to make it out there.
Mm.
I would have loved to have gone. And then he said, I'm a big fan of yours,
Oh.
which I was like, what? I was like, you're a big fan of mine. I'm a big fan of yours. And so we traded some messages back and forth. And then eventually I said, I would love to interview you for my 100th podcast. And he said, yes. It was very hard to pin him down when it's someone who's working in the industry like he is, like his schedule was crazy. But I just had to be completely flexible for him. And when we finally got him, and he gave us 2 hours of time, and it was a fantastic conversation. But those are the places in the musical, in the song, like if you want to know more
Hmm.
and research more, like they're actual things that happened. And Fort Necessity is waiting for you. It's one of those. They have recreated the fort. You can go to where the massacre of the French officers took
Okay.
place, and then you can go right to Fort Necessity and see what happens there. And then you can really feel the words of history has its eyes on you. Like Washington knew in that moment he really should have lost everything.
Right.
He really, this was it. This was it. In that moment, he's watching his men die. He's like, you want leadership so bad, you want to be in charge so bad until something like this happens. And this is the moment where you could, make or lose your name. Like he would have, his name would have been made in such the wrong way.
Right.
And he knows that. He's learned that. And so he's trying to impede that to Hamilton because Hamilton's looking for a fight, looking to make his career, like, and make his name, make his legacy. And Washington's trying to tell him like it doesn't always happen like that. And you got to be ready to lose it all too, and what you can learn from that. So I really love that song. I think it's probably my favorite song from
Mm-hmm.
Hamilton. And Fort Necessity, like I said, it was just I was just driving by and I had been there before. And I was like, I'm gonna stop and just talk a little bit about Hamilton. And that video is
Yeah,
one of those ones that kind of did it. So
that's
yeah, it's there for
amazing.
you though. Definitely in the middle of nowhere, Western Pennsylvania.
You never know where you're gonna find history, but driving down the road, that's for sure. Especially on the East Coast. I mean,
Yes.
we live in Frederick, Maryland, so we're in the middle of Civil War country. Which not being someone who covers history is sort of wasted on me. So, but but yeah, so when we go up to Gettysburg, I remember just growing up going there and running around the battlefields and stuff. But so I'm very used to the history around here. So I think it's just cool that there's a way now through Hamilton that some of it is pulled through with I I think the history's always been there, but that popular culture sort of made it
Hmm.
more interesting and got people excited about it. Like, no one knew who really Hamilton was. It wasn't a like I don't remember even in history classes in school like really discussing him or stuff. So, um just bringing a new historical figure to to the foreground was just really interesting and I'm now there's more historical musicals going on Broadway, which um is interesting too that they're moving to do more of those. So
Yeah, I
they're
think,
fun.
Hamilton is one of those characters that we knew, we just didn't know.
Yeah.
Right. And we didn't know how close he was to Washington. I never knew he was an aide to George Washington. Right. I knew he was Secretary of Treasury just because he's on the $10 bill. That's
Right.
it. That's all
Right.
I know. Right. And then to learn of this close friendship with the Marquis de Lafayette, which I also kind of knew, but didn't really know, which this gave him a whole new life to me, too. Um, I really loved Aaron Burr's perspective of it
Mm.
too, because that's kind of what Hamilton does. It gives you everything from Burr's point of view. And Burr is one of those people. We had a Burr historian on Talk with History. So if you ever want to watch that, and I'll tell you why he came on. But Aaron Burr, like I knew he killed Hamilton in the duel,
Okay.
but I didn't know he was the vice president.
Right.
Right. And so there was just so much about Aaron Burr that I wasn't aware of his life. And then after Hamilton, there's more. There's so much more to Burr that's so interesting. And that's why we had the historian on. So if you want to go to a cool place to visit that's like now you're getting into some deep Hamilton history, if you really want to, when Burr sings about his daughter, Theodosia at the time, when she becomes a young woman, is like the most popular woman of the time.
Oh, okay.
She is the most educated. Burr
Hmm.
educates her. She's like who we would look to look up to today. Like who would you want to see on TV and hear from? She's the most sophisticated. She's dinner party. She's the one you would talk about. Theodosia Burr is just what women would aspire to at that time. And because Burr raised her with everything he could give her, she is like the most intelligent Renaissance woman of the time.
Hmm.
She marries the governor of South Carolina, and Burr goes away for a while because he kind of gets in trouble after the whole duel and everything, and he runs away to England. He goes down to the South, and people think he's trying to make his own country and come up against right. So he gets in trouble. There's more to his story. He gets in trouble with Jefferson, and he goes to trial in Richmond for treason. Now he's found not guilty, but then he runs away to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he comes back and he's like, I'm going to make my name for myself. I'm going to come back. And Theodosia has all of his papers in South Carolina. And she's like, I'm going to bring your papers to you, Dad. I'm going to get on a boat and I'm going to take this up to you in New York. And Theodosia Burr is lost at sea. The whole ship is lost at sea.
Oh my
That's the last we ever hear about Theodosia Burr.
gosh.
Yes. And so she loses all the papers for Burr. Burr will never really recover from this. He dies in solitude. He dies in, desolate, like he has no money, destitute.
Wow.
But Theodosia Burr is never found. So 2 years later, after this her ship has sunk, there's a woman who shows up at Gatsby's Tavern in Alexandria.
Mm-hmm.
And she's well dressed and she's well spoken, but she's with a gentleman who won't let anyone speak to her or talk to her, and keeps her at arm's length. And they're there at Gatsby's Tavern for 2 days before she dies. And she's buried in the Alexandria Cemetery under the female stranger. This
Oh.
big tomb that says female stranger and has a beautiful like epitaph on it. I think it's from Shakespeare. And so I take you to that grave and tell you the story of Theodosia Burr, because some people speculate it's Theodosia Burr because there were stories that pirates had taken the ship and that
Oh.
she had survived and that they had taken her prisoner and this person had taken her prisoner, and they end up at Gatsby's Tavern where she ends up dying. And so who is this woman? No one ever knows who this woman is, but definitely has some means to have this beautiful tomb in Alexandria Cemetery that just says female stranger. So I sing about Theodosia and this, who could this be? Who could this person be? And so I have the Aaron Burr historian on. We talk about who Theodosia was at the time and how much people did look up to her. And some of the stories that some trunks washed up, that there are some portraits of Theodosia that are now at Princeton because
Okay.
Burr's family helped the foundation of Princeton, and that's where Burr is buried.
Right.
But and what happened to her, and could this story be true? He says that most Burr historians have debunked it. They don't think that she survived, but you don't know for sure.
Yeah.
Right? So I take you to that grave. I tell you that story. Who knows? So, but those are the strings of American history that you can kind of go, whatever happened to Theodosia? She's such a
Right.
big part of this song. She has a song to
Right.
herself in Hamilton, right? And it's interesting to learn more about them later. And same thing with Philip. Like if you want to go to those dueling grounds, like they're there for you.
Mm-hmm.
You can go there and stand there, and there's a monument there. And Philip and Hamilton, they duel in relatively the same area. So you're standing around where it was. It's been developed now.
Mm-hmm.
You can go there and stand there and be there. So there's more people in this story and more things that are happening, which is really cool to go and visit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just fascinating. We actually went over to the Weehawken dueling ground. It took us a while to find the
Yes.
to find the statue. We're just sort of the poor neighbors are probably so tired of people just walking up and down the street aimlessly. But it's just such a it's just weird to sit and stand there and be like that really happened. Like that's not just a story. Like that's how they solved problems. Like that's crazy to
Yeah.
me.
It's crazy. And to think that was like all like wooded area and they took like
Right.
rowboats over,
Right.
right? They rowed over. And if you know about Hamilton when he shot, like he's basically paralyzed after he shot. And so basically they had to drag him into the rowboat and take him back over to New York. And it's just like he's like this is what we do. This is a
Right.
part of the duel. If you want to
Oh.
see those pistols, they're at the Philadelphia recreations of them. I think they're
Mhm.
owned by the bank, Mellon
Okay.
Bank, one of those banks that Hamilton helped start. But the recreations of them are at the Philadelphia Constitutional Center.
Okay.
You can see them there. You can also see the Hamilton, the pamphlet, the Reynolds
Hmm.
pamphlet. And what is so neat, and this is the picture I will give you if you want to use it for a thumbnail, is they have recreation bronze statues of all the men who signed the Constitution.
Oh, okay.
And so you can go nose to nose with Hamilton. So I stand right across from Hamilton and look at him, and he's looking at me, and we're about the same height.
Nice.
So and so you can see how tall George Washington was compared to everybody else, right? Because he
Yeah.
really is that's kind of why I think another reason he kind of moves into this infamy is because of the height of who he was.
Right.
Men weren't that tall back in that day. Hamilton, I'm 5'7", Hamilton was 5'7", so and you can walk around and you can take pictures with these gentlemen and you can stand and they have them recreated in like their height, their stature, their clothing. And so it's really neat to be able to walk around there and to kind of
Yeah.
see them for what they would have looked like in full form.
Yeah. That it's really interesting, and that's why I love the walk, the walk with history, because you can walk with history now. This has been so just sort of mind blowing in one ways and just really fun and interesting. Just the depth that you can go and where you can stand in front of. Um, so I do have one last question. Like, is there a like bucket list Hamilton place that you haven't been but want to go?
I want to go to, I think it's LaGrange.
Okay.
So I think, so you can go to Richmond Hill. That's where Burr will meet George Washington for the first time. It's an area of Greenwich Village. It doesn't really exist. You can go to the room where it happened.
Hmm.
Uh, it's just a plaque on the wall now in New York because the building doesn't exist anymore.
Okay.
And it's kind of, but the one thing that does exist is the Grange, which is Hamilton's home.
Yes.
And that's where Philip will be brought to when he dies. This is where Eliza will hear about Hamilton dying because she goes to Hamilton. He doesn't get brought back to his house, but they have moved it. The location's not the same, but the house is the same. And now it's Hamilton Grange National Memorial. It's run by the National Park Service. I would love to go there. That's probably a bucket list place when it comes to Hamilton.
Hmm.
Chris Nevis too. Like I want to go to where he was actually born, and there's a whole museum to Alexander Hamilton and Nevis. I
Oh,
would
nice.
go there as well.
Right.
Um, you definitely like if you want to hit Colonial Williamsburg, get there. Washington Crossing.
Hmm.
Like I've made my whole bathroom Washington Crossing. I put a sign in there that says it in the room where it happened, even though people are like it's the bathroom. Um, Hamilton's with him for Washington Crossing, right?
Right.
So was President Monroe, right? He didn't cross on the boat with him, but Monroe was part of that crossing. And to stand on that location, to stand there, there's this big brick that says Washington was here.
Yeah.
And, you know, like this is like the moment, right? This is like the turning point. Like he's going to attack these Hessians on Christmas Day and like try to get a victory, try to get a morale swing for America. Um, that's waiting for you. Valley Forge is waiting for you.
Yep.
Hamilton and Lafayette and Washington all hang out because it's wintertime in Washington's headquarters. I spent 2 hours in that room. I touched the banister. I was like all the things because I knew they spent time at Valley Forge.
Right.
So those are all waiting for you. One place I did go that was real bucket list for me, and I wanted to find it, and it was one of the hardest places to find. And I have a video, was Lafayette's grave.
Oh, okay.
So this is in Paris, right?
Nice.
I
Hmm.
had gone for the 80th anniversary of D-Day, and I ended up in Paris for a couple of days, and I'm like, I'm going to find Lafayette's grave. And this is another interesting story. So he's buried in Picpus Cemetery, which is kind of like a middle cemetery in a city block in old Paris, where people really don't speak English.
Okay.
So you got to kind of be ready. To, like,
Gotta have
I
that
need to
Google
know.
Translate
Yes,
ready.
that's what I used. And it's an old convent, which is still a convent today. And it's only open from like 1 to 4. So you
Okay.
have to really time it. And there's only one door that gets you in. And again, you have to kind of be able to speak French to get in there. And I was able to find it. I was able to get in. I was able to find Lafayette's grave. Lafayette is buried in soil from Bunker Hill.
Okay.
He has an American flag that flies over his grave. I left an American flag for him too. I left a dollar bill with George Washington's face on it. But he's buried beside his wife, Adrian, and they're buried beside a huge guillotine pit.
Oh,
And you're probably like, whoa, from the French Revolution,
right.
right? And so he's buried beside 3,000 headless people. And you're like, why? Well,
Gosh.
Adrian, his wife, was an aristocrat,
Oh,
right? And during the French Revolution, Lafayette gets put in prison because he's an aristocrat, but he's also done great things for the French. And so they're not going to kill him, but they want to kind of keep him away. Adrian goes to join him in prison. And while she's gone, her mother, her grandmother, her sister, who are all aristocrats, are guillotined because
oh,
that's what happened during the French Revolution. If you
yeah,
were a person of higher order and it wasn't, by birth, not by merit, they kind of wanted to get rid of that. And so Adrian wanted to be buried beside her family.
wow.
And so when she dies, she wants to be buried beside her mother and her grandmother and her sister who are in this guillotine pit. And so they're buried right beside that pit, and then he's buried right beside her.
Oh, wow.
So it's such I felt standing there, I'm like, you're standing in part of so much history, not just
Yeah,
American history, but like the French history. And so finding that place, I have it on a video showing you it. They don't allow you anywhere near the pit, but you can see it. Like you're not allowed to walk around it.
right.
Um, there's other people buried in that cemetery, but you have to prove that you're related to somebody in that guillotine pit.
Gotcha.
So then you can be buried there as well. But that was
Interesting.
a great find for me. There's some moments where you're like, I found it, I figured it out, and that was one of them for me.
I love that. Um, this has been, like I said, so fascinating, and I so appreciate your expertise and your time. Um, Again, thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
I want to give another big thank you to Jenn for coming on the show. She gave us so many great historical places to visit, and just so much information, and it was a pure joy. So thanks again, Jenn. I hope everyone enjoyed that. For this week's Yeti's Pop Picks, I want to give you a few more places that you can check out, but these are tied more to the pop culture point of view, and they're also in New York City. So, one great Hamilton related place to visit is the Drama Bookshop. And it's not just any bookshop, has this direct connection to Lin-Manuel Miranda because he spent hours writing the musical in the shop's basement. And when the shop was in danger of closing, he and his Hamilton collaborators actually bought it to save it. So he reopened it in 2021. It's in a new location, um, beautifully redesigned by Hamilton's set designer David Corrins. So if you're a theater fan, this is definitely some place to check out. Broadway history, great books. If you're looking for a monologue book, that's the place to go for sure. Also, here's the second one. If you're looking for a true Broadway institution, go check out Sardi's. Now, this is an iconic restaurant that has been a staple of the theater world since 1927, and it's really well known for its famous caricatures of Broadway stars, and they cover the wall. So, if you're a Broadway fan, I feel like this is something you need to check out once. Check out the caricatures from past and present. There's ones from Lin-Manuel Miranda, Chris Jackson, and Leslie Odom Jr. So it's a little touristy, but it has a lot of Broadway history. So I would definitely check it out. We've done it. We've eaten there. It was a fun experience. And last, I'm going to just bring up again the Public Theater. This is where Hamilton first came to life. This is before it got to Broadway. He developed the show here. It was premiered as an off-Broadway production. And the Public has just this long history of launching groundbreaking musicals and plays, including A Chorus Line and Hair. It's just really known for taking creative risk and championing diverse voices in theater. So maybe see a show there or just pop by and check it out. And with that, we add another stamp to our pop culture passport. I hope that this episode inspires you to get out and explore all that is quirky and cool, even in your own backyard. Follow, download, and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Tell a friend and leave a review if you like what we're doing. It really does help the show to grow. You can also follow me on Instagram or Facebook. Just search The Roaming Yeti and keep roaming and finding your fun.